Friends and enemies, welcome to yet another edition of the Canadian Bitcoiners podcast. I'm Len. Today, I am going to be talking to Ryan McLeod. He is the nuclear Bitcoiner, and we're going to be chatting a lot about what's going on in the world of energy generation, and what's going to happen with the future of energy. Because this is going to be something. Well, it's actually a topic of the day these days, given what's going on with tariffs and energy and how that's being bandied about. It seems to be a currency that's being used as a way to try to leverage and influence power over somebody else. But either way, it's a topic we'll be talking to Ryan about. Before we go any further, though, I do have a couple of sponsors. I got the chalk off my list of things to do here. So number one, we have EasyDNS. Look, if you are a business and you have a website running or web hosting, email hosting, all that stuff, I would suggest look somewhere else to migrate it, because a lot of companies out there, they may just rug pull you. EasyDNS is not going to do that. They've been in this business for decades. Also, if you are a new business or an individual who wants to look a little bit more professional, or you have your own website or maybe your own web hosting, email hosting, all that stuff, you could use EasyDNS to do them. They are the best in the game because they are privacy centric. You can pay with your Bitcoin. They've been into this for, as I mentioned, decades. So a lot of different options you have over there. You could also run a Nostr relay through them if you want to even run potentially even a Bitcoin node through them. There's lots of different instances you could do through them. Lots of different options. But what I suggest you do, if you're going to order some services from them, you might as well make one huge order. Why? Because if you use our code CBP Media, you're going to get 50% off your initial purchase. So you might as well do that. So look, we have our own website, CanadianBitcoiners.com, and we're using EasyDNS to facilitate, host, and to run it. So we're using it. We like them, and Mark and their team, they're the best in the business. So if you need any help along the way, they'll be able to provide you that assistance. So check them out, EasyDNS.com. Second, we have Bull Bitcoin. Price of Bitcoin, I'm not sure what it is right now. Moscow time showing 1196, so I'm going to guess 82, 83,000, what the heck it is. Either way, it's a good time to buy, good time to sell your Bitcoin. On-chain Lightning, Bull Bitcoin has you covered either way. And if you're not going to simply just buy or sell, there's other things you could do with them. You could pay your bills with your Bitcoin. Although I would suggest maybe it's not the best of time to do so, but they still give you the option to do that using their bill service to pay your bills with your Bitcoin. The reason why I say not yet, because the price of Bitcoin, I think, is going to go up in sometime in the near future. Could be wrong, not financial advice. Another thing you could do, you could buy gift cards and with your Bitcoin, so you can start spending your Bitcoin indirectly with the Bull Bitcoin. So it's really good service that they have. Also, they're non-custodial. This is something you want in an exchange. You don't want to deal with having somebody hold on to your Bitcoin. So check them out. Open an account if you haven't done so. Use our referral link below. And by doing that, you're going to get $21 added to your account. No questions asked. Well, with that being said, it's time to bring on the man of the hour, the man providing us the power, Ryan McLeod, Nuclear Bitcoiner. How are you?
Evening, Len. I am doing great. Yeah, lots of excitement going on in Canada for nuclear power. Yeah.
And I see you're wearing a hockey jersey. It's a Team Canada jersey.
This is my Bitcoin jersey. Yes,
a Bitcoin joke. Very cool.
I got this playing in the inaugural Canada USA Bitcoiners hockey game that took place at the Montreal conference last year. Yes, I was the losing goaltender, but I'm not going to feel bad about it because I haven't played in a while. And they needed a goalie, and I met the very minimum requirements of I have equipment that still fits. So if they do find somebody else that if meets higher than those requirements, I haven't been able to get any ice time. So I would not be upset if I get cut from the team if they find a better option. But I will play if they need a goalie. I am still down if they absolutely need somebody that has equipment that fits.
So Ryan, what was the final score? I know that it was the inaugural game, but I know
like 9-4, something like that.
And they had a ringer, right? They had somebody.
Yeah, well, they had Brandon Gentile. He was like almost went pro were it not for an injury. So, yeah, I think he was kind of might even have been holding back on us. So it was a fun game nonetheless. We had a great time. I made a few good saves. Probably let in more than I didn't, but it was fun.
Well, it may be time, we call in our own ringers. Is Crosby going to be doing anything around that time? Probably, yeah, because it's going to be the beginning of the season. We got to call in an ex-player.
Well, we did joke that sooner or later there will be Bitcoiners that come from professional hockey leagues, and we will need to set some standards in the dressing room as soon as there is shit coining. Like, I don't care how many Stanley Cups or Canadian gold medals you have, you cannot be on this team. So, like, we've it's been discussed, and it is an eventuality that we are expecting, and there has to be some standards set early to set the tone that this is the Bitcoin hockey tournament.
I will say this, and you don't have to respond to this. Our cricket team is going to be fantastic in about a decade's time. So I'm going to leave it at that. We'll go any further.
Nice.
Ryan, you've been on our show. This is the third time you've been on our show?
Something like that. 3, maybe 4. I'm not sure.
You're a good friend of the show.
A few years. We've met at a few conferences and random meetups. Yeah.
So for people who aren't aware of who you are, just give like a quick background, because you're not just some Joe Blow I pulled off the street that's going to be talking about nuclear energy. You have some pedigree here, so maybe you can just give a quick background of who you are.
Well, I'm Ryan McLeod, as you've said. I'm not an engineer or a professional scientist or in any manner, but I'm a chemical technologist that works in the Canadian nuclear industry at Canadian Nuclear Laboratories. And I got this idea in my head that we should be using Bitcoin mining to advance Canada's agenda and intention to use small modular reactors to upgrade remote northern communities off of diesel and improve our energy sovereignty and energy security across many different domains. And yeah, basically I'm pitching that Bitcoin can be a great amplifier to the goals that are already set in motion that Canada is pursuing in regards to various sizes and scales of markets that we want to apply small modular reactors to. And then, like, even in the last few years, we've pivoted back into building large reactors as well. And there's intentions to market a new version of the CANDU reactor as well, and see if we can build that domestically and possibly internationally. But that is that is some exciting things going on in Canada, and I've just been kind of pushing my little angle of Bitcoin mining inside of it, and it's gaining a little bit of traction. I've gone to a few conferences promoting this idea in general, and it's simply just like when you want to build power assets in the middle of nowhere, you have a customer that you can sell that power to that is very dynamic and flexible and location agnostic. It opens you up to a lot more creativity in terms of scale and planning and projecting into the future of what you want the growth of that community to look like. And the Bitcoin mining can act as an insurance and a hedge against that uncertainty of does the growth happen or not, because it can still just act as a placeholder. But the initial intention of what I'm promoting, it essentially takes from Brandon Quittem's idea, the Bitcoin as a pioneer species idea, treating Bitcoin mining as a pioneer load that can be used to facilitate the deployment of small reactors within Canada in small markets that don't typically have the demand that would support that level of power generation.
So these small modular reactors, what is the definition that makes up this?
Yeah, the SMR category is a nuclear reactor that's less than 300 megawatts of generating capacity. The typical reactors that we're familiar with, especially in Canada, the CANDU reactors, started with the first ones about 600 megawatts, and then the later ones were 900 megawatts, and they're expecting the newest one to be over a gigawatt. The reactors that were just finished in the Abu Dhabi and the United Arab Emirates, they were 1.4 gigawatts each. So a set of 4 is putting out 5.2 gigawatts in total. Most of the reactors that are being built in Chinese or by the Russians right now are on the gigawatt scale, but they are also experimenting with smaller reactors that have applicability to a broader range of markets that the typical gigawatt size reactor would not make sense for. Like, we're not going to put a CANDU reactor in a Iqaluit, but a 300 megawatt reactor might make sense. So it also breaks down into multiple subcategories, because then you can get down to like less than 10 megawatts, they call the micro reactors, and those are more applicable to like very remote communities, remote industrial applications like mineral mining and refineries that are isolated from the grids. And there's also the consideration that like Canada has a military presence all through northern regions that would be much better security with nuclear reactors and being able to support our defense capabilities in the north, because Yeah,
Mhm.
from the looks of it, like, yeah, if the Russians mobilized and from the north, Canada is not going to be putting up much of a fight. So yeah, that is one of the angles of how we bolster our security in the north, is to amplify our power generation capabilities up there as well.
I just put players with hockey pucks up there and just start shooting them, because we have an ability to at least shoot. So maybe that's one way we could keep them. Those
Well, I'd
micro
rather keep the
reactors.
conflict to the ice in general. Like,
Yeah,
that was
why
the whole
not?
point of, like, yeah, we have these hockey tournaments and we invite each other, and like we take out our grievances in the sports arena, so we don't have to with kinetic warfare.
100%. Yeah. At the end of the day, maybe a few egos have been hurt, a few teeth are lost, but still, everybody still has their limbs and only lost a life. This is a good thing to do. So, and we can fight another day. So these micro reactors, I find to be fascinating, though. And in terms of like the quickness and how quick one of these can be put up, like, what's the time frame from basically, yes, we're going to go ahead with it, to finally one of these micro reactors are actually producing energy? But what is the time frame from those two times?
It's going to be definitely a few years, because there's phases to this. Like, the first step is they have to build a demonstration reactor to prove its capabilities, to prove the technology, to work out troubleshooting. So for many of these first demonstration reactors, they're using licensed nuclear facilities like Canadian Nuclear Laboratories, like the Darlington site, the Bruce site. They're taking advantage of these existing sites to facilitate first of a kind new generation reactors. So what's going on at the Darlington site is they are currently building the 300 megawatt BWRX reactor that's designed by GE Hitachi. There is some tension about that right now, because it is American company, American design, and there's the tension with the Americans right now, but that has been the go-ahead plan. And many have argued that because the site is licensed for a much larger reactor, we should actually be building a much larger reactor instead of 300 megawatts. But at the time, when the decision was made, the generation and the demand for that generation wasn't really where we expected it to be, so we weren't in the market for gigawatts of power. But now we are in the market for gigawatts of power, so the calculus has changed. So even now in Canada, like, we're looking at a site in Wesleyville that's further down the highway. So if Pickering is the closest one to Toronto, and then
Mhm.
Darlington is out towards Bowmanville, and then further on Port Hope is Wesleyville, which is a site that OPG has owned for decades now, that was initially considered for the original build out of CANDU reactors, but it has basically just been mothballed, and now they are looking at it as a potential site for new nuclear reactors. And then they're also planning on expanding the Bruce site to build a third set of 4 reactors that will bring its operating capacity up to something like almost 14 gigawatts of in total, with between 12 full units. But that is currently out for um, they haven't decided on which technology they're going to use for it. Obviously, there's a lot of the Canadians are arguing for the CANDU technology, but there's also like Westinghouse, the Koreans have the model. EDF in France has a reactor design. So there's a few different contenders potentially to build on that site, but obviously I'm biased and would like to see a CANDU reactor, and that would be fantastic. And yeah, so we're just taking advantage of what we have, and then we're going to so those first phases will probably take like 5 years or so. Then once the technology is kind of proven out and there's been the troubleshooting, then we have to build the mass production facilities, which is the intent is kind of like to build them in a off like a production line similar to like aircraft and like
Ah.
large ships. And then the idea is that you can build several of these a year in quick succession, and then they will be designed in a way that they can be quickly transported to site and then assembled and generating. So once the site's already selected and prepared, once the reactor arrives, it will only take 6 months to 2 years, depending on the size and scale and complexity of the project. But we're looking, before these things are in commercial operation, like mid 30s, like that we might start seeing the first ones prove their designs in the early 30s, like, and then it'll
So
be
we're
a
still some
gradually,
time
then
away.
suddenly, oh yeah, like we're tons of time away. Like this is
Yeah.
the nuclear industry is a very, very slow moving behemoth, and it it's very risk averse, and having not built things in a while makes it challenging to get back into the flow of building new things. Like Canada's good at taking care of our reactor fleet and operating them, but we haven't built anything new in a long time. The Americans also haven't built anything new in a long time. So maintaining your labor force and your supply chains that are having those capabilities it creates complexity when you don't have them and you have to rebuild them. And so there was a time when people were looking at nuclear like it didn't have a good future over the last few decades. So then you don't get people going into nuclear engineering. They'll go into finance or some sort of tech career where there's also a lot more money and lucrative opportunities. Whereas like if you want to go into nuclear, like you have to like want to go into nuclear. And so it hasn't been drawing as much talent as we've needed to sustain the capabilities of what we want to do in building these things. So like it's a very chicken and egg problem. Like yes, we have to transfer the knowledge of the generation that we still have here, because many of them are aging, and then there are some gaps just because of not hiring, just not attracting the talent. But now that that's reinvigorated, like we have seen in the last 2 to 3 years, like a significant increase in interest in nuclear power at all levels. But yeah, it takes a good generation to reinvigorate and completely reestablish like a labor force that is capable of these projects and interested in doing it. And it's not it's not an easy project to undertake. And then there's so many different designs that are in the market to try and find the product market fit. So in the different like subcategories in the different markets, like we're not going to need 10 different reactor designs. They'll probably settle upon 1 or 2 that get built in mass succession, which has much better like economics of scale and multiples of whatnot. So there's going to be bankruptcies, which in fact there already has been one. The company that Canadian Nuclear Laboratories was working with, called the Ultrasafe Nuclear Company, went bankrupt. Looks like it was just poor finances, and they had to file for bankruptcy, and they had to auction off all of their assets. So I haven't heard any news since December or so about that, but it's uncertain as to whether or not we will see or hear from that company again. It's private, so we won't really hear much about it until they are comfortable releasing more information. But there's still many other companies that are pursuing these small reactors and like big reactors. Like nuclear is getting so much attention right now, but it's not going to be happening very fast. Like
it's like a big ship, and you're moving it, and the direction which you're trying to head into, it takes forever for the ship to be pointing in it. So I'm wondering though, Western nations, I mean, I'm looking like in Europe mostly right now, like Germany, for example, they have mothballed a few of their reactors. They shuttered them, and it's obviously causing some issues over there for their energy generation. But here in Canada, and specifically Ontario, it seems to be like the mecca of nuclear energy. And I don't know what's the reason for that. Why do we embrace nuclear over here where other jurisdictions seem to be pushing it aside?
Ontario power generation, well, like back in the day, Ontario Hydro was what they were called before they split.
I remember that.
So Ontario Power Generation and Hydro One, they used to be just one entity. They were a lot more I don't know, they were interested in building big things. They had the capabilities to build this infrastructure. It wasn't like contracted out to other parties to do this work. Like Ontario Hydro had built dams. They had been building like the coal plants that we have. Like the one in Nanticoke was for the longest time the largest coal plant in the world until it was retired in 2014. And so they had collaborated with other the Tennessee Valley Authority. So there's a long-standing relationship between that institution and Ontario Power Generation. They've built a lot of projects in collaboration with each other, and like shared a lot of knowledge with each other. And like there's still like this small BWRX project is part of that long-standing collaboration that they've had with each other. And it also just came about with in the 50s, like when Canada wanted to build nuclear reactors, and we did not have the same capabilities of building the steel required for the boiled water reactors and the pressurized reactors that the Americans were using. We had came up with our own CANDU design, and it actually, like, it worked out very well. It was unique in that it uses heavy water as its moderator, allowing us to get away with using non-enriched uranium as our fuel. And so that had its benefits of not having to deal with enrichment and the weapons proliferation problems. And it was a great design that kept reiterating and building and improving with each successive generation. So like the Pickering A side was the first set of reactors, then Darlington, then Bruce, and then we exported a few around the world. There's a CANDU reactor in Argentina, South Korea, one in India, one in China, and 2 in Romania. And the 2 in Romania have actually received financing from some large development company, I think an American company that is going to help fund finishing that project. So 2 CANDU reactors at Chernivtsi, 3 and 4 will be completed, and that will be 2 more CANDU reactors to add to the fleet. So yeah, so Canada is eager to get back into that position that we once were. Like we are a powerhouse in nuclear power. We have the full supply cycle. We mine the uranium, we process it, we and then we refine it into fuel, and we use it to fuel our own nuclear reactors. We're working on a deep geological repository and a near surface disposal facility so that we can safely manage the waste for long-term storage and reaccessibility for if it ever has any uses in the future. And we need to be like reviving that and bringing it back to the state that it was in the 70s and 80s when Ontario was an example to the whole world of like when you really set your project management on to a goal, like you can build these great things. And I think we built like 16 or 20 reactors within like 25 years or so, starting in the early 70s. And most of them are still operating today. The only ones that are being retired officially are the ones the A side and Pickering's 1 through 4, and the ones that were built in Quebec, which most people aren't even aware that there was nuclear reactors in Quebec. But
I thought it was all what the heck? They have them there. I had no clue.
Yeah, the Gentilly reactor. So one of them was just like a demonstration on a new CANDU design, so it never fully manifested the potential, so that was more of a test. But the second one was exactly like the CANDU reactors at Darlington, so there was no reason why it couldn't have had its life extended and continue operating. Like there was that actually we have our environment minister to thank for that one. He was one of the head cheerleaders for retiring that reactor because it was only shut down in 2009 2010 sometime, so it was not really that long ago that Quebec removed itself from the nuclear power. And then we also have one in New Brunswick, and New Brunswick also has plans with some of these small modular reactors. They have a port in their northern parts, I think it's called the Belledune part, where they have it's right now powered by a large coal plant, but the idea is they want to turn it into a large clean energy industrial facility where it's going to be primarily powered by a 100 megawatt reactor in multiple modules, and then it will also power the manufacturing plant to build that module of nuclear reactor, but then also support all kinds of other industrial processes, whether it be like desalination, hydrogen generation, the synthetic fuels, like you name it. Like once you've built enough power and it's available, like we can do all of these fancier applications that our scientists and are very eager to deploy into like the commercial markets, but it just doesn't quite seem that we're there yet. Like seeing how many at least hydrogen projects and battery projects are struggling to find their footing and like manifest anything that in the real world without struggling financially. Because it seems like a lot of these projects without massive support are not as financially viable as we had hoped for.
In terms of like where it operates best and where it can't operate, I'd like to know, because I know, for example, in Italy, they were talking about having nuclear plants established there, but because it's prone to earthquakes, it's hard for them to go ahead with it. So that's one of the things that they're looking for is very stable. You're not going to have earthquakes, and that seems to be one of them. Is there? What about the ambient temperature? Does it work best if it's hot or cold, or doesn't really matter? Or it just works? Period. I want to know where nuclear works best and where it shouldn't be placed.
Oh, as far as I know, it depends on the reactor type. So if your coolant is water, you're going to want to be near a body of water or like a river or something. So most reactors are in Canada and the US are ringed around the Great Lakes. Mm-hmm. And throughout Europe, they're on rivers, and the German ones, the French, and they're all near bodies of water. But then Russia has reactors. They're in the far north, so they can tolerate the cold. It's just a giant boiler, and the complex part about it is that the source of the heat for that boiling is radioactive material. So handling that safely in civilian use cases can often be challenging. That's one of the reasons why we haven't seen huge uptick in nuclear freighters. There's a lot of talk about them, and there's a lot of potential and interest in them, but it's that having nuclear powered ships on the high seas, there's jurisdictional problems and who's responsible problems. It's one thing when it's maintained under military applications, but there's some regulatory complexity to be worked out before we start seeing nuclear powered freighters all over the ships. But there are some that are out there, like the Russians are known for having icebreakers that are nuclear powered, and they have small barges that they use to plug into remote coastal Siberian communities that they can use to power them up. So the use cases have kind of already been proven. There's no reason Canada could not do that if we were able to facilitate one of these designs to commercial maturity and find a way to make it modular so that we can put it on a ship or on a barge, and then we have lots of coastal regions that can benefit from that. We have lots of potential customers all throughout the world that Canada typically has a pretty good relationship. So as if we have a good product, we will get it out there. We just need to start building and the industrial alignment.
Oh, sorry, we're just losing. Saying domestically, I think we need it more than anything else, given what's going on
for sure
politically. He's I hope everybody's aware of it, but we're talking here in Ontario to levy 25% tariffs on exported energy to New York, Michigan, and other states. And that was since been rescinded. So there's going to be no longer, they're going to be putting this on. But it just goes to show you how sensitive people are to having any increase, large increases to the cost of generation of electricity. So here in Canada, are we doing a good enough job, though, for preparing ourselves for scaling out? Because there's going to be more requirements for electricity in the future, right? As more people go towards electric cars, more people electrify just about everything in their lives, there's going to just be more demand. So are we prepared for this demand? Are we putting ourselves in a good position to meet it in the future?
We will be able to, but we're going to have to kind of give on some of this net zero, at all costs position that some leaders seem to be all in on. Because if we want to meet the needs, we're going to need gas plants. We're probably going to need to continue having our operating coal plants continue operating. We need to take full advantage of all the hydro that we have. And then we also, we have to consider that we have neighbors that kind of became dependent on us. They retired their nuclear capacity, all throughout that northeastern corridor that you described. They have retired, I believe, 5, maybe 6 nuclear power plants in the last decade or so, Palisades, Pilgrim, Duane Arnold, the Indian Point, Vermont Yankee. I know I'm missing at least 1 or 2, but that's a lot of power that's been taken offline. And then the assumption, the argument was that it wasn't economical to extend their life because the market was not favorable to them because of the way that the market is structured. It kind of gives better incentives to the intermittent generators or anybody that's collecting tax credits or or other out of market incentives, because they are basically paid to generate electricity when the grid doesn't want electricity. That doesn't work for a nuclear power plant. Like, they just want to operate all the time and just get a base rate for power, and they will be happy. But when their other generators on the grid are pushing too much or too little, and like you're trying to compensate with your base load generators, like their economics just don't work. And so that's one of a number of reasons why they just decided not to invest in extending their lives. And then they said that, oh, it's okay, we will just replace them with windmills and solar panels and batteries. And in reality, they got replaced by more natural gas and more exports from Canada. So then you have to consider that there's only so much to go around. Like, yeah, Quebec has been blessed with massive amounts of hydropower that previous generations had built and commissioned for them. And it's now challenging to build more because you can only flood so much land, and there's only so much like river space available. And the further and further north you get, the harder and harder it is to transmit it to the south. And then the perpetual perennial problem that they have building power generation in northern Canada is there's no demand up there for it. And yeah, it's not a viable investment. But obviously now we'll get around to Bitcoin mining, but that's the whole idea. Like, that kind of customer frees that up. But they had this kind of long-standing thing where when Canada is generating excess, because we often do in Ontario and Quebec during like kind of various seasonal variations, like when Ontario is at our max capacity, when all of our nuclear power plants are all out, we've got our hydro up to the max, and all of our other facilities are pushing power onto the grid, we are way over the demand that we're required, like terawatts over.
Wow.
And so I think it was sometime in like 2018, 2019, before we started refurbishing the reactors. Yeah, it wasn't unusual to have a year where like 20 terawatt hours was either curtailed or negatively priced, somewhere in that ballpark. And it's a lot less now because we have partial reactor fleet shut down for refurbishments and life extensions that will be happening for the next few years. So at any given time, we've got 2, maybe 3 reactors offline. So we're not pushing all that power onto the grid that we can. But if you consider that, like 20 terawatt hours, if you put a 5 cent per kilowatt hour price tag on that, that's $1 billion worth of potential revenue that's just out there. And so we've kind of I assume this is accurate because of the source that I got it from. I forget what his name is, but he's one of the guys that works with the Canadians for Nuclear Energy. But he was saying that yeah, we basically, the Americans pay 0.2 cents kilowatt hour for our nuclear exports, and
That's so cheap.
And this import tariff was going to bump it up to 1 cent. Was roughly
so
what he was saying. I know it's still ridiculous, and it was throwing this whole fit over like 25%. Like, we need a tariff tracker because there's like so much of this insanity going on, and like it's hard to keep track of it. I think it's just to keep everyone confused and on their toes and reactive, but like it's very entertaining when you can kind of like step away from it and kind of take the view from above. Although it's going to greatly impact our cost of living and standards of living here in Canada if our leaders react poorly to it. But we will see how that goes with our new God King in place. And
well, we'll see what his
Trudeau's finally gone and everyone's happy. But yeah, now we have a central banker as our prime minister. This is new territory. And he's a smart guy, and he's very well connected, but like he doesn't sit at the kids' table like Trudeau does when it comes to who's making decisions about what's best for Canada and its place in the globe. So he's he also feels like we're stepping it up to like a higher caliber of opponent when it comes to politicians that probably hate Bitcoin, and we just need to prove that you're not going to be able to do anything to stop what's coming.
But there's a reality here. See, there's like in the States, you mentioned those 5 to 6 nuclear plants that were shuttered in the past decade or so in the United States, and that's caused them to have energy demands that they can't meet. And that's why they're importing some of the energy from Ontario. Now, those locations that were shuttered, are they at a point where they could be started up again? or have they just there's no way they could, because I'm wondering if there's going to be an opportunity for them to look at what they have and say, you know what, we have these sites here that they're closed, but we could, do a little bit of work to bring it back up to speed. Oh, and if we have any excess electricity, hey, look at this. We have a president that's now talking about Bitcoin. Why can't we use this as an opportunity to then send a little excess electricity to earn some money, in this case mine Bitcoin? So I'm wondering, is this even a potential over there? Could they bring up these nuclear reactors that have been mothballed in the past little while?
I know they are actively working on the one in Michigan, the Palisades reactor. That one got shut down, and then like within a year there was talk of restarting it. So the last one that was going to be shut down was Diablo Canyon, but a group of very determined activists made sure that that didn't happen, and they kind of backed down and kept it operating, and it's proven to be very vital to keeping power in California. But yeah, so Palisades up in Michigan. I think that there was talk about Duane Arnold. I haven't seen anything conclusive, but for the most part, it seems like they're not, like most of them are no, but a few are yes. And like 3 Mile Island was actually another one that was mentioned a few months ago, that Microsoft is interested in taking all of it. So then there's that, because it's also has the notoriety for being the site of the 1979 coolant accident, and it was a bit of a mess, but like nobody got hurt.
Loss of life.
You remember the nuclear accidents that happened where like nobody got hurt, and it was relatively benign relative to other industrial accidents that happen all the time. It's like, yeah, radiation is another industrial hazard. Like it has its risks associated with working with it, but so does working with electricity or hot things, spinning things, moving things. There's a lot of hazards at the workplace, and that's also just one of the challenges of working in the nuclear industry, is that there's the striving for excellence in safety manifests in a lot of bureaucracy, and sometimes that can be challenging to overcome. Things can take longer to get done than they otherwise should for just simple things like but it's the nature of the beast, and we have to work within the constraints that we're given. But it is I do feel that it is unfair that nuclear power is disproportionately maligned compared to similar industries and technologies, when it's mostly comes down to people's poor understanding of radiation and the hazards that it poses or doesn't pose, because we are exposed to radiation all the time. Like if you have granite countertops, they are emitting radiation. There's radioactive material in bananas.
I was going to say bananas.
There's places in the world, like there's a beach in Brazil where the sand is radioactive. There's a hot spring in Iran where there's like much higher than normal background levels of radiation. And it's showing that there's pretty solid evidence that small exposures to radiation is not only like basically harmless, but it's kind of, your body reacts to it similar to exercise and like muscle tissue damage, where it causes small amount of damage that is within the scope of your body's ability to repair and recover from, and then also become more resilient from being able to recognize it and being familiar with that repair. But like anything, like you jump off a 100-foot building, you're not recovering from that. So it's like there are limitations and thresholds where that does not apply. So there are but then that's one of the complexities, is that it was a long-standing in nuclear safety that any exposure to radiation at any dose was potentially harmful and cumulative. But since then, like decades of evidence has kind of disproven that at least up to a certain threshold, where then a certain amount of exposure is definitely hazardous, and it manifests in various degrees and symptoms depending on the severity and the dosage. Like there are examples of being exposed to massive amounts of radiation in a very short period of time, and that is essentially a death sentence. But I work with small amounts of radiation constantly. I have no issues whatsoever. Like I work in an industry that has people that have worked with radiation for decades and have shown, there's no noticeable change in like health effects in relation to the people that work around the radiation and the people that work in the neighboring communities. So it's just mostly comes down to just education and understanding, because radiation is a tricky thing. It's like when it's happening at a dangerous rate, that means that the material is decaying fast, and then that it will reduce itself into a safer state at a fast rate. So most of like the harmful radioactive material that we do encounter from the accidents or from any incidents is reduced to a level of harmfulness equivalent to like the ore that we got it from within about a century. And then people will also say that, but then some of it is radioactive potentially for millions of years. But the material that is radioactive for millions of years, that's because it's very slowly releasing the subatomic like radioactive particles. So it's not giving the same dose at the same rate as the ones that decay faster. So they're essentially benign as long as you're not like consuming them. So some material like that, it just gets stored in a canister and gets safely stored away in an underground repository is the long-term plan for that material. And even some of it, we will be able to get more fission energy potentially out of it, because there's still lots of uranium and other fission products that are a part of the fuel. So like it's a solid thing. Like that's another poor understanding that people have, is like they think that this radioactive material is going to contaminate the waterways if we put it into a repository deep underground, because we've chosen a site in Ignace, Ontario, which is up close to Thunder Bay. It's been chosen as a site for the repository for Canada's nuclear waste. And the people that are trying to derail that and don't want that to happen, they will first of all exaggerate the hazard of it traveling, and then exaggerate that the potential of it getting into the water table, when in fact it's going to be buried beneath the water table, and the water would have to penetrate multiple layers to get to the material, and then extract itself out, and then find its way up hundreds of feet into the waterway, and then for people to get exposed to it. So like, I've heard the complaint that we'll have these death traps and death zones that like generations of people won't be able to go near, but it's like it's really not that complicated. It's just going to be an underground like web of tunnels and a large open kind of dome area where we just have large lead casks that just sit there for decades, centuries, and it'll be monitored. It's not like and it's also like a lack of faith that humanity's like not going to be around to like take care of it. Like if we are continuing to like build and grow, like unless we completely destroy all of humanity, like I'm pretty sure we're going to monitor what we're doing with our nuclear byproducts and potential fuel for more energy soon.
Well, the stakes are so high considering what you're dealing with. And if you consider how many nuclear reactors and how many years we've been using nuclear reactors for, and how few incidences there were. You mentioned 3 Mile Island, Fukushima would be another one, and Chernobyl. But the latter two that I mentioned, one is due to a tsunami, and the diesel generators were just overwhelmed when the water table came up. But the other one was just human error. They just, from what I gather with Chernobyl, they just did a poor job when they were trying to test something, and then I don't know the specifics of it, but it was just more human error for what they did over there. But what I'm trying to get at is, with all we've been doing with nuclear, we have so few accidents, not just with the reactors themselves, but also storing of it. It kind of reminds me of like the airline industry, where the stakes are rather high. If you have an incident with the airline, it's the likelihood of death is rather high. But we don't hear a lot of it because they have so many redundancies built in. There's so much regulation put into it. They test things over and over again. And I look at the nuclear industry in the same light, that they do the right thing with it in terms of the storage, with the maintenance of it, with everything with it. It seems to just work in my eyes. So that's just my own 2 cents. But I want to bring back this discussion quickly to Bitcoin and how this is going to somehow potentially be used in energy generation moving forward, because you obviously you're a Bitcoiner and you're your nuclear guy too. But so the melding of these two, I'm not sure how many people share the same views you do, but I hope more people do. So I'm wondering, in your eyes, what's the marriage between these two in the future?
Well, it certainly sounds like many Bitcoiners are fans of nuclear power, especially once they've understood how Bitcoin mining works and how it is basically an insatiable energy sink that will take whatever we throw at it, and as long as the economics work for whoever is operating the machines, we will clearly continue feeding this thing. And nuclear power seems to be very attractive to the people that operate these machines. As far as I know, there's one operating facility, TeraWulf, at the Susquehanna power plant, nuclear power plant in Pennsylvania. They built a small site. It was an interesting. They've had an interesting situation recently because they had sold off the rest of the site to Amazon, and the intention was that Amazon was going to build a data center behind the meter at that power plant. But now they're getting into arguments with the Energy Commission because taking a gigawatt of power off the grid is no longer contributing to the costs of maintaining the distribution network. So that will end up costing the ratepayers more if that amount of power is not contributing. So there's that site, and then there's the UAE. It's pretty well known at this point that they have a partnership with Marathon Digital Holdings, that they've built a fairly large immersion cooled facility with like state-of-the-art cooling tanks to keep them clean and cool in the desert environment. And they're basically using that to absorb the glut of energy that they get sometimes from their solar, and the fact that they've now got 5.2 gigawatts of nuclear power constantly running, and some seasons they need more or less than the power that they have available to them. So the Bitcoin miners provide a very convenient buffer for them. But my general idea is that I see nuclear power is very excited about the prospects of AI. And it was like very feverish. Like there was so much interest, and then that DeepSeek thing came out and kind of torpedoed a lot of people's expectations in the amount of power that is going to be needed to support these inference machines and these large language models that we've found ourselves consuming a lot of our times with and communicating with, probably more than other humans at these days. Like but it did show that that they can get the similar outcomes with less energy intensive resources, whether they were genuine or whether they are hiding or obfuscating that or not remains to be seen, because you never know. But the general idea was that maybe we aren't going to need tens of gigawatts and like these large 5 gigawatt star bases that they were talking about to power these massive data centers. But maybe we still will, because that then gets into, everyone started talking about Jevons paradox, where it's like if you just make it cheaper to do it, people are just going to do more of it, and then ultimately you're still going to consume obscene amounts of power to support this fun new tool that humanity has gotten its hands on. And like I barely think we're getting started. Like I still talk to most of the people in my day-to-day life, they've barely even touched it. Like I play with it a lot. Like I'm building a pretty fancy spreadsheet model, and like I'm coming into encountering like spots where I'm like, I need a formula. I know that Excel can do that formula, but I have no idea how to make it do that formula. So I just give the robot little instructions, and then it just spits out a formula for me.
What's your go-to? Is it Grok?
I've just been using ChatGPT. It's just like I started using it, and I haven't really moved on yet, but I want to, like, I've been playing around with Perplexity, but it's convenient. And like, just sometimes when you're just lazy and you just don't want to type all that stuff, it's just like, you do this for me. And I've there's been some tension between me and my wife, because she prefers the human touch to things. So she's not a big fan of using it as a crutch, because I'll also like, my kids are in high school, so they're having encounters with it, and school's very complicated about how they treat AI. They don't want you like using it and plagiarizing with it, but you also want to be able to teach them how to use it, because it is a valuable tool if it's used correctly. Like, don't make it do the work for you, but kind of like help use it to teach you how to do the work that you want to learn how to do. But then it's also like, why would I want to learn how to do coding languages now when I can just give a description to a robot and it does this stuff for me? Like it seems like we are like just seeing all of these little pieces being built and the different people building them, because like the Bitcoin space gives you a pretty broad perspective of a lot of different things going on. And it just seems like sooner or later there's just going to be like some critical piece that just snaps it all together, like the AI, all like the Bitcoin, the user experience is just going to get finally make that like kind of like the smartphone moment where it's just where you can barely remember that time before we didn't all have these goddamn things in our hands every fucking second. And like, yeah, like that was only not even 20 years ago.
Yeah,
Like,
you're 100% right.
I'm right at the cusp of that generation that I was like the last generation that grew up remembering a time before the internet. And it's weird raising children in this new era because things are moving faster than I am like prepared to even know what to do with. And it's just like, give them some tools and hope you prepared them enough that they can figure it out for themselves, because it's a weird and wacky world and it's nothing like the one that I came into.
But
Yeah.
does Bitcoin fit in there?
Yeah. Well, I was so we kind of got derailed with the AI, but I was So I was just saying, like, the on-grid stuff, the big nuclear, they're interested in AI. They're going to be playing with a lot of these AI contracts. That's kind of what's going to push them afloat. But my interest is more on the off-grid, on the remote applications, on the small markets, like what we want to do with these micro reactors. So they're a little bit more complicated, because at least like when you're building the big reactors, like even if you have a large load from your data center, you still kind of have connection to the grid. But even then, this thing at Susquehanna is making other companies like the Microsoft 3 Mile Island, like they're just like, well, maybe we just won't connect it to the grid and we'll just keep it all for ourselves, because it's complex getting connected to the grid, especially that kind of power, and they have to do studies, and it's like, are you flexible, or are you just taking a glut of power? What happens if your on-site primary power goes down? Are you just going to like flash on like hundreds of megawatts onto the grid, and now the grid's got to be like, whoa, what do we do about this? Or are you going to have like backup generators that can keep you cool? Like, are they going to be diesel, gas, like what have you? Like, you have to think about all of those redundancies. Whereas then, like, the Bitcoin miners, they're a lot more rugged. We can put them in like really wacky places where nobody in their right mind would consider building like a tier 1 or 2 data center. Like, we're talking like tier sub-zero. Like they say like a standard data center like wouldn't want to be less than like 99.98% uptime, but like the Bitcoin miners is like depending on your efficiency, and it seems like that's what Marathon's kind of intention is if you have different power generation assets that have different like supply and demand kind of just curves to go with them, like you can play either as just like a base load demand with you have the best miners on the market, they're always on, like you only turn them off in extreme circumstances like the big winter storms that rolled through Texas. Whereas they also bought a wind farm where they know that that's only going to have like a capacity factor of like 50% at best. So they're not going to put their newest miners. So that's where they're going to put their S21s where they're getting good solid base load. And then they'll retire their S19s. Instead of selling them on the market, they'll just be like sending them to a state send them to a farm upstate, and they'll find a good home, because technically at this point, like, because the efficiency gains are not as rapid as they were at the previous generations, that is a viable option now. So no ASIC is really retired until there's no real good use of it. Like, I don't know if you can hear, I've got an S9 humming behind me. He's a great little space heater. And that's the other thing that we get into too, is like, we want to deploy power to the north. We also want to electrify heat. So we have a perfect heat source. So I was just reading, there's a report my company did about just like the future electrification and energy plans for Canada, and like multiple times through there, it's just like electrifying every appliance we possibly can and trying to move away from natural gas. Like, gas is great when where it's available, like it's reliable, and we have great infrastructure, especially here in Ontario. But there's some places where that's not always viable, and you don't always want to be like, and if you have to ship diesel into the north, like you'll want to make the most use out of that. So if you have alternative power plant options, so you have a nuclear power plant, you'll probably still want to keep your diesel generator there. You don't want to completely retire it, but then you save that for emergencies, and then you use the electricity to pump the electricity straight into people's homes, and then you can put the electrical heating source right where you want it to. Or you can do like what they're doing in Finland, where they're just heating large bodies of water, and then that's used for local district heating systems. But also have to have the district heating system already in place. Like Finland already has these district heating systems. They're dispersed all through their country. They have a good like population density, and the climate like works perfect for it. And they've just been swapping out their electrical or their hydrocarbon based heating for Bitcoin miners. And like I think that I saw like 2% of their entire district heating is Bitcoin mining at this point. So there's no reason why we couldn't start doing that in Canada. Like we don't have a lot of population up there, but we still have population up there. And they're very dispersed, and it's very difficult and expensive to get reliable, affordable energy to them. So that's why these SMRs are like a very strong consideration for doing just that. And then my idea is we use the Bitcoin mining as the anchor load, so it doesn't limit us to just enough power to support the local community like just now. Because if you're going to do strategies that involve just a nuclear power plant with a diesel plant for base load and peaking, or the SMR with batteries for just kind of like load shaving, all of these other strategies, they kind of limit the grid to just enough to cover peak load, and any overbuild that you put into it is just wasted capital potentially if you don't have a use for it. So what Bitcoin miners unlock is that you can now far exceed what you need for local capacity now, and you can build what you want to project for the future. Like say you're expecting 5% load growth from this community, and you also know that there's going to be a project that's just going to like increase it by like a lump of 2 or 3 megawatts, and you can model and project around that. And then you can have the Bitcoin miners just as that placeholder from day one, generating revenue from day one, even though the local capacity factor and load factor is only like 30%. But over time, as they grow up to 50%, 60, 70% of taking that power, that you taper off the Bitcoin miners and you send them elsewhere. And then at the same time, you can use those different efficiency tiers in the same way that you would use a base load power generator and a peaking power generator. You use your high efficiency miners as your base load always on, and then you use the lower tiers that are less efficient as your like load following load. So like there is a little bit more complexity because now you've got different types of miners in place. So as long you'd have to make sure that you have the resources to maintain and their operations and whatnot. But there's no reason why you couldn't fill one shipping container full of like S21s and then another shipping container full of S19s, and they perform different roles, but it's perfectly catered to what the supply and demand profile looks like for any given community or industrial process. And then you're also then you got the heat in it. But I think it's an unlock that now we can build more units. So then we also have the redundancy so like if you're building just enough for the community, if you were to lose one of your power generation assets, then you don't have a backup for it. Whereas if you have an extra unit that's just completely occupied with Bitcoin miners, if you lose one of your primary units, you just take one of your secondary units, stop mining, and you put it into primary use. So it gives that added level of redundancy as well. So I think it's got a lot of potential. This is what I'm kind of shopping around within like the Canadian nuclear industry, and I'm really hoping that it starts catching on. Like I've been running models, and I'm hoping to get like a proper like something with numbers to show that there is something here, and just kind of like find that inflection point where when you can sell power to something in a remote scenario, like how much does it have to be paying you before it just says like, all right, instead of just building just enough, just max it out. But then you also have to have the constraints, because that was the first thing I ran into, is just as soon as it reached a certain threshold of how much power or how much revenue you can generate per kilowatt hour, it was just like, just go off scale, build as much as you want. But I'm trying to model a community in Nunavut that's about 5 megawatts. I don't want to install 2 gigawatts. So please limit it and constrain that a little bit. So just refining and tuning and just finding the right variables to work into these models, because Bitcoin mining is its own monster, and then projecting what it's going to do in the future. I just kind of ripped off Saylor's model to project Bitcoin price into the future, but then I was like, well, how do I project the difficulty? So then I just copy pasted the price one, and then I just made it into a difficulty projection tracker as well. And then I can put the price and the difficulty, and I can change them at different rates, and then they spit out different hash prices.
Mm-hmm.
And then I've got the different machines that run at different efficiencies. So then when you take a hash price and you take a machine efficiency, you get dollars per kilowatt hour, and then you just subtract your operating costs, and like, it's really simple math to work out the profitability on these things. It's just, is Bitcoin going to do what we expect it to do? Because like, everybody seemed euphoric that when we hit 100K, we were going straight to 200K, and now we're at 80K, and everyone's upset. But like, I don't know,
Bitcoin mining,
it's crazy times.
I mean, I think now we're approaching 12 terahash per watts per terahash. Sorry, in terms
something
of
like that. I think I saw BitDeer was saying that their new Seal miner is going to be like less than 10.
So that's 50% more efficient than the S19s, the very good S19 models that came out just a few years ago. So, but the rate of efficiency, like if you compare, like say an S9, but I know an S9 came out 8-9 years ago now. It's
8 years ago. But yeah, if you've got 2 cents kilowatt hour, or you're using a space heater anyways, S9's great.
I agree. If you're going to heat your area with electricity, like, why wouldn't you plug in one of these units? It just totally makes sense. Ryan, though, but you know what?
Just like, we've done this for an hour, fan, or it's not wife approved.
We've been doing this, and I know you have constraints here, so I don't. This has been a fucking awesome talk, and I could go for another hour. I have one question for you, though. I'll get through one more at you, because I really want to know your colleagues. You're a chemical technologist, and you must be talking to them, and also engineers and everybody else in the field of nuclear energy about Bitcoin mining. What are they saying about it? Are they on board, or are they very skeptical about what you're bringing to them?
Well, they're not as enthusiastic as me, because I'm a crazy person, and I've accepted that. But they're definitely curious. They see me like tinkering away at this spreadsheet, and then like, I'll make like updates, and I'll show them like a new graph, and I'm like, look what I made it do, and they're like, that's great. It's like, here, look, see, if Bitcoin appreciates at this CAGR for this many years, look how big the number gets. And they're just like, yes, that sounds great. And it's like, it's like, how can we lose? But yeah, like there's been a little bit of like it's the same old FUD that everyone's heard about, just like that. Oh, but people with criminal intent might use it, and it's like, well, everybody uses money, so like, get over that. Or it's too volatile to be money. It's like, well, I'm not really suggesting we use it as money. I'm suggesting we use it as a power load that's going to pay us more than zero. So I really don't care if it's going to pay out 3 cents or 6 cents. Like, obviously more is better, but it depends on the circumstances. As long as it's more than zero, because otherwise your options are you don't sell the power to anybody, or you're dealing with negative prices, which are bad economics.
Yeah.
So it just changes that game. But yeah, it's catching on, and I'm gonna get some opportunities to pitch it to some more like higher up, like management VP types in the not too distant future. So we will see how it sits with them. Like, some of them are vaguely aware of what I've been up to. Like, I got a funny phone call from, or an email from Comms when I did the first Bitcoin conference, because they clearly scour the internet for things about their employees, and then they saw Ryan McLeod's talking at the Canadian Bitcoin conference. So then just our comms guys just like, should we know anything about this? It's like, well, I don't speak on behalf of CNL, and I know none of that stuff. I'm just, these are my own ideas, and I'm just going. I was invited to talk about these ideas because nobody else was talking about these ideas, and I seem to have just fallen into the place of being the guy that talks about these ideas and pushes these ideas, and it just kind of got obsessively into my head, and it feels like I have to create this report and just get this out of my head so that it will stop bothering me, and I can move on to something else, or at least build upon it. But I need to at least get this math that's stuck in my head out, because I don't know. I used to be like a big math kid, and then I've spent too much time in the lab and too much time as a parent, and now I found a math puzzle to solve, and it's gotten, I don't know, it's brought me.
It's a healthy obsession, I would say. Yeah. So I mean, I don't want to keep you too long for your family because we only scheduled an hour for this thing max, and now we're past it. Are you going to be at the Canadian Bitcoin conference again this year as well?
I'd like to. I'd hope to.
You spoke at the last two, I believe.
I've been at the last two. I've already been invited to speak at the Learning Bitcoin one in Vancouver. So there's that. And then, I was in El Salvador for the last Adopting Bitcoin. I had gotten to go to the International Youth Nuclear Congress in Abu Dhabi in, what is that, September, October. That was quite the adventure. And then there was another one in Toronto about the disruptive, innovative, and emerging technologies in the nuclear sector. And so they invited the Bitcoin guy, and it was mostly talk about AI and like digital twins and robotics and a lot of stuff like that. But then I was like, that's great, but you need to make sure that we can for this stuff, because investors aren't going to pay for things if we can't prove a solid investment case. And if our cost of energy is going to be through the roof and we don't have like an anchor load to bring it down, and basically I want to rip off what Gridless is doing and apply it to small modular reactor microgrids. And so that's essentially my plan. And if anyone's not familiar with Gridless, they're taking small hydro in the middle of Africa and making it economically viable by attaching Bitcoin miners to it and making sure that it's 100% used all the time.
Ryan, I really appreciate you taking time out of your family to come and talk to us or talk to me.
It's fun.
Well past an hour, and I'm sorry for that.
No, it's good. I haven't had a Bitcoiner chat in a few months now, so it feels like I was like I needed a fix.
Like I said, when I DM'd you, I said anytime you want to come on, and I mean it though.
Anytime I got another one coming up. Joe Burnett invited me to do his one.
Yes, next week I think. Right?
I think we're frozen.
Yeah, sounds like looks like we're frozen. We're kind of back. Yeah, there we are.
Yeah.
So
next week I'm going to do Joe Burnett.
Yeah. So I mean, you're going we'll leave it at that. Ryan, before we sign off, I just want to hand a baton to you, and maybe you could just indicate where people could find you in case they want to reach you. Oh no. Looks like we lost Ryan. The last moment too at that. I'll leave it at that. So, ladies and gentlemen, if he doesn't come back, I'll just end it at that, and we'll just cut this short. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Ryan has been an awesome guest, and like I told him, he's welcome to come back anytime he wants, and I hope to have him come back in a very near future. So with that, you take care, and we'll be back at this again Monday. Without Ryan, of course. We'll be with Joey and myself. But Ryan, buddy, appreciate you coming on the show if you listen to this. And with that, take care and have a good weekend.